This episode is part of the RVA Leadership Series, conversations highlighting people across the Richmond, Virginia region who are helping to shape the future of engineering, transportation infrastructure, technology, and the built environment. Before we dive into today's episode, I want to invite you to sign up for our weekly newsletter titled Win by Design. I'm going to be talking about this in more detail in the coming weeks, but the newsletter officially launches in June of 2026. You can sign up now using the link in the show notes or by going to winbydesign.co. Now, let's get into today's conversation.
Success isn't just about what you achieve. It's about living a life that reflects your values and priorities. Welcome to Engineer Your Success, the podcast that helps you lead with intention and live fulfilled.
What does consulting, building a community grocery store, and helping make America's roads safer have in common? It might be more than you think, and it starts with one special person who refused to stay on the path that no longer fit. My name is Dr. James Bryant, and I'm the host of the Engineer Your Success podcast. Today, we have Ryland Potter as our guest. Ryland, welcome to the show.
So thanks for having me.
Tell us about yourself and your current role in the work that you do.
Yeah, I work in road safety, pavement friction management, and I tell people about the importance of pavement friction on our roadways and how they can improve pavement friction to reduce crashes and make roads safer.
So, for the person that's listening to this, they may be a mechanical engineer or a computer engineer, or they may not even have an engineering background at all. Describe to them what you do and why it's so important.
The work of making safer roads is for everyone, regardless of where you sit. If you've been on the pavement side of the house or on the safety side of the house, or you work in the Department of Transportation, you're in private industry, right? There are so many opportunities to make our roads safer. And in doing so, making a tremendous amount of change in people's lives. Transportation is one of those things that we interact with it so much. It's such a constant around us that we forget that it's there and forget how it happens. No one gets in a car and was thinking about getting to work in the morning and is thinking specifically about a roadway unless there are potholes. They're thinking, have I done this? Have I had my breakfast? Was my first meeting? We are constantly surrounded by choices that affect how successfully we get from point A to point B, whether that's to and from work or to and from school, to and from our friends and loved ones' houses. Realizing, as I did coming into this industry, that there is an incredible opportunity to change the way that DOTs are making those decisions, moving to proactive road safety, pavement management in the context of asset management, and bringing safety from the very start of the process through the end, making decisions that lead to safer pavement, safer roads to have impact on countless others. I'm very privileged to have the opportunity to do. It makes it easy to get up every day and get to work and know that I'll be helping people navigate the roads more safely.
So, when it comes to talking about safety and friction, what's the most challenging part about your job today?
Over the years, the market has changed a lot. When I first started meeting with people, even though pavement friction is one of the ways that internationally countries, transportation agencies have managed their roadway networks for safety for decades, it's still something that is not widely used here in the US. 7 years ago, I found most of my first conversations with people would be things like, so there's this thing called pavement friction, and you should care about it.
They may have said, yes, there were some crashes on this section of roadway, and we did go out there and do a friction measurement to figure out what the change was going to be after those accidents have happened.
Those would be akin to the same people who said, oh, yeah, I read about it once in the Green Book. Friction is a constant, right? I use that to calculate speed. I'm here to tell you that does not represent the reality of friction on the roadways. Friction changes over time. Knowing where your friction is, monitoring that, and being able to address it in a timely manner so that you're not just waiting for crashes to occur, but you're instead proactively addressing them is a big part of that. But so too is recognizing that friction changes not just in time, but in space. So across your network, pavement friction is not a constant, right? It's not going to be the same in a tangent section as it is in a curve. And so you have these areas of higher risk because the cars themselves, when interacting with the roadway, will require more friction to navigate that space safely, right? When you're coming to a stop, higher kind of centrifugal force when you're going around a curve to keep the car in the lane, your car demands more friction from those locations. So what we find is that friction tends to degrade fastest in places where it's being called upon all the time, where friction demand is high. That's not well understood at a granular level. People don't see that. They see it in this reactive mode where we know friction has a strong relationship to crashes. We're only ever seeing our friction once some crashes have occurred to bring friction management in line with the broader concept of asset management. What you're looking at is measuring, monitoring, and then correlating your crash risk with both friction and features of your network have a relationship with friction and crashes. So your speeds, your traffic volumes, the geometry of certain locations. And you can use that to evaluate on a network level, what are the features of my roadway network? What are the levels of friction that are most likely to lead to crashes? And therefore make targeted decisions across the life cycle. Do I need to start with a better material selection here? Do I need to choose a different pavement, or do I need to specify certain types of aggregates to achieve friction performance over a longer period of time? Flowing into maintenance, do I need to think about making timely treatments along with my pavement preservation process? And I know that this is something that you spent a lot of time in your own
Yep.
career, right?
Mm.
How do I optimize not just for crack ride across the life of the pavement? Am I able to strategically work in safety improvements or choose treatments based on safety performance, therefore extending the safe functional life of that pavement all the way through to the back end where safety gets involved because something has happened or a problem that needs an immediate address has been identified.
It's like the full gambit. And part of what I'm hearing you say is roadway management that's influenced by friction or influenced by safety. Not that safety is an afterthought or that friction is an afterthought, but that it is a ongoing part of the management process for that roadway.
And so that in a nutshell is where the conversation has gone from 7 years ago to, hey, there's this thing called friction and you should care about it, to what you've just described, right? It's a proactive process. It's part of asset management. Really, the opportunity here is to incorporate new ways of understanding leading indicators of risk on our network to manage things holistically, to optimize with safety in mind, and to make data driven decisions about how we invest in our network, not just for the typical things that we've historically looked for, but if we want to make a significant change in the 40,000 fatal crashes that occur on the US network every year, we've got to do something differently, right? And
Yeah.
so that desire to do things differently is a part of one of the most motivating factors in this work.
When you're optimizing for friction, what influence does it have on the other pavement surface characteristics? If you're able to optimize for friction and address the rutting and address some of the other things that you may be designing for.
Yeah, the technical answer is that there's no one size fits all for pavement friction management. So you spend a lot of time in the pavement management and pavement preservation world, right?
Mhm.
Think about the tools that you were using, those kinds of decision trees of how do we determine whether or not we're going to take some kind of action on this
Mhm.
pavement. Essentially, you can do it a few different ways. You can use thresholds, right?
Mhm.
So a lot of the way that internationally it's managed and some of the ways that federal highways is published about this kind of approach is to use threshold, right? If your friction is below a certain threshold, you want to go out and investigate
Okay.
that engineering judgment situation where you go out, you say, yep, my friction at this location maybe was below where crash risk starts to increase as a function of declining friction. And so I'm going to look at later characteristics of this location. I'm going to examine what our crash history is. I'm going to look at when we did most recently pave, and I'm going to make an engineering decision about whether or not we do something. What the US has done in the last few years is bring the predictive safety analytics involved in the safety performance function approach, which is something that if you've been in the safety side of the house, you're intimately familiar with. Essentially, you have a fancy expected value equation that tells you throw a bunch of stuff in there and then it tells you how likely a crash is to occur. You change some of those things and then you figure out how much did my outcome change. Well, then therefore, if I make this kind of intervention, I should expect this kind of change on the back end. You can use that too to help make decisions about, all right, well, if I were to pick this kind of treatment, right? So I've got a list of projects already that I know based on my current prioritization methodology, it's going to come up over the next 3 years.
Mhm.
Which ones of these do we want to target for maybe an additional safety performance? Then I'm going to look at using those kinds of predictive safety analytics to say, well, if I increased this planned treatment from a thin overlay, maybe or a latex, what if I instead did a microsurfacing, right?
Mhm. Yeah.
What's my understanding of how friction crash risks have operated on my network historically, what then is likely to change if I choose this other type of treatment option? Can I then justify the cost of doing this different treatment over the life cycle of my pavement if there's an additional safety benefit there? There's different ways of incorporating it. You can use thresholds, weighted factors, safety performance functions to help anticipate benefit. But yeah, that's the
So for your current company, you provide the equipment for that type of measurement. Are you also consulting with DOTs and agencies on the types of treatments or interventions that they can put in place?
Yeah, exactly. So WDM as a company has been around for 80 years and we been involved in roadway industry and then manufacturing a number of different kinds. You have a broad portfolio of pavement condition measurement equipment. But what we are uniquely known for is our SCRIM continuous pavement friction measurement equipment. So SCRIM was originally established in the UK. So our WDM is a UK headquartered company. The US is a subsidiary of that. WDM UK built the original scrims in the 1960s, and then they have over the years worked with a number of different transportation agencies across a number of different countries to either provide equipment or provide data collection services. So when we started operations here in the US back in 2019, we brought over some of the Scrim technology from the UK, and that's essentially what we are offering to DOTs, along with a long history of working at transportation authorities, being the folks in those decision making positions, people who are responsible for the maintenance of a network or asset management of a network, or even material selection within the network, helping folks understand once you have this data, what you can do with it, what
Yeah.
is the best way to implement it is really both part of our practice, but also one of our guiding principles, right? It doesn't do anyone good to collect data and then have it sit on a shelf somewhere. Data is only as good as the decisions you can make and how you implement from there. So it is a huge part of the work that we do with clients to help them figure out how to best use this data and how it can help them make good decisions about what to do with their networks.
Okay. That's great. So you've talked about your role and what you do. We've mentioned in the intro some of your journey, but I do want to go back to that and start talking about you as a person. So, what is one word you'd use to describe yourself and why?
I think my non-answer here is probably all the answer you need. Why restrict yourself to one word when there's like 20 that you can always use? Curious might be a good proxy for a lot of other things that I might otherwise use. Maybe I will instead say thoughtful and not in the kind of self-congratulatory sense. A lot of what I have done in my career, particularly as I have been able to find myself in positions that are more aligned with what I'm interested in, is done with intentionality. The way that I do work both internally in our company and with our clients is with a lot of thoughtfulness and intentionality. You can't really work in a role that has so much potential to make large systemic changes, right? You have to be thoughtful about how different people are impacted at the macro level, on micro level, and be able to keep all of those different things in balance. I try to be thorough in my approach. I try to be intentional in providing value and aware of how the things that I do and we do as a company will eventually impact people around us.
So my follow-on question is, would your family and friends, the people closest to you, use the same word to describe you?
That is not something I can answer. I'll make some choruses of yeses behind me, and that will make me feel like I know it. I don't know. I guess that's something that I should take home and ask my family this evening. I'll have them all submit slips of paper so none of them has to feel called out. How would you describe mom? Interesting question. I don't know.
When you first started out talking, why limit yourself to one word? The word that came to mind to me was options. Because
Yeah.
in terms of the conversations that we've had and the little that I know about you, you are good at taking advantage of the options that are in front of you.
It's hard to know how much of that is intention versus orientation. But yes, I think I am big on being able to find multiple ways to get to an outcome. I tend to see there being many ways to get it done as opposed to only one way to get something done. I tend towards wanting to preserve options where possible. It usually takes a while to convince me that something can't be done.
Has that lean towards options ever gotten you in trouble?
Oh, yeah, I think that there is kind of a one more try or like never say die aspect to my personality, which probably drive people crazy because they think they've built their case. We need to move on from this. And I'm like, but wait, are you sure? What about this thing? So, yeah, I'd say probably maybe I can hold on a little tightly to the idea that something is still an option beyond its reasonable shelf life. Fortunately, I'm surrounded by smart people whose opinions and experiences I value. That's important to me. I do not think that I ever have the monopoly on all the good ideas or options. I'm always willing to entertain other people's perspectives and give it a reasonable hearing. I love to see other people implement their ideas as well. So if someone has brought a really good option to the table, I love supporting people and seeing those things come to fruition.
Okay. So now tell us a little bit more about your whole journey. Part of the way that we connected is I'm continuing to expand my network locally in the Richmond, Virginia area. And so let's talk about your origins and your path to where you are right now.
Yeah. I am almost a Richmond, Virginia native. We moved here when I was young, when I was 5, and I was here through high school and then went away for a while. As every kid who grows up in Richmond, they absolutely reject the idea of being, and I will do anything to get out of here. Just get me out of here. I'm never coming back. And then, you get to your mid 20s and 30s, and you're like, "Uh, the scars have healed a little bit. I do value the idea of both saving for college and retirement simultaneously. You're telling me that there's life above a basement apartment, then you get really excited about the prospect of coming back here and you realize how comfortable it is to live in Richmond. Coming back to Richmond after having worked a number of years in management consulting, it was a really bad cycle of getting into it, burning out, it being essentially the best available option, having graduated into a couple of recessions, the best available option. There was always going to be a spot for me there. Finding on each subsequent try that it hadn't gotten any better for me.
So
um,
when you finished and graduated from undergrad, you went immediately into management consulting?
I spent a year living overseas, working in Germany, doing research on cross cultural entrepreneurial behaviors, an extension of some of the work that I did as an undergrad. But I never really saw myself becoming an entrepreneur, never really thinking for myself that I was excited to take on the mantle of owner. After that, I spent collectively about 10 years in management consulting and worked across a lot of industries, did a lot of thinking and strategizing on behalf of other people's businesses, then ended up working for the state of Virginia for a few years where I met WDM and decided it was an opportunity to put some of the strategies that I had, developed for other people to the test.
What did you like most about working in management consulting, and what did you like the least?
Those are relatively easy questions to answer. What I liked most was the diversity of things that you were exposed to. I worked across a lot of different industries, different contexts, companies that were developing new technologies, companies that had a new product, companies that needed to understand how to handle consolidation in their industry, getting a chance to peer into the specifics of how those businesses work and how the industry works and the dynamics of that industry was very interesting. What was difficult is in a lot of those cases, you are expected to form a pretty quick opinion about what you think is happening. The majority of the work that goes into your time on behalf of companies is finding information that confirms your hypothesis. It's about tailoring that information and squeezing that information down into a concise message that you can deliver that's consistent, right? After a certain point, you narrow in on your idea of what the context is and what the correct solution is. The best management consultants will tell you they get it right 100% of the time. And the realistic management consultants will tell you, I don't have enough information, but this is what is defensible and let's roll with it. And that disconnect was what would ultimately do me in every time. Was there was always something more to know and deeper to get on. The question is this: am I using this new information to update my priors, right? Am I content to say all new information should confirm exactly what I thought before? Or am I open to the idea that new information should change and shift, even if I've put together this wonderful 50 slide deck that tells you exactly what you want to hear, right? I've got some new information. Let's consider this. I think that is one of the things for me when I worked in management consulting is being able to, over the life of a project, realistically address new information, changing dynamics to move and update assumptions and priors, and therefore be fluid and flexible with what ultimately might be the best strategy. That in practice is useful for a business, right? A management consulting project is a snapshot and an idea of a strategy. What you do in practice has to acknowledge that there are a bunch of things that are constantly changing and that to do the best version of your strategy, you're going to have to change and adapt that process as well.
And that flows back to the discussion that we had about thoughtfulness and options, and you wanting to make sure that you're considering all of those options. It kind of naturally flows into how you have self described how you are.
I guess that kind of puts a bow on exactly why I burned out. Because if I'm this person and I need these things, and now I'm being asked to rewrite that every few months, yeah, you can see how at the end of that, I say it's not ultimately going to meet my understanding of how things actually work. And I am also self-described, so pinch of salt or whatnot. But right, going back to the question on what's the value of data, right? There is no inherent value in data. The value is in implementing the data and making a decision and moving forward with the data. That's part of that interest in the work that I'm doing now is I want to develop a relationship with you to help you understand how to use this data, accepting that all of these things might change. Your context is going
Mhm.
to be different, you VDOT versus you text dot versus you Alaska DOT. All of your contexts are going to be different, but let's figure out how we can actually do something, right? And make good decisions, make informed decisions, and
And I
not.
wouldn't consider a value ladder for data because if you don't have any data, having data is very valuable. You maximize the value that you get from the data,
That's fair.
how you use it. But that's something to consider in terms of when you're framing the discussion, this value ladder for data. If you don't have data, you get some as valuable. So many agencies have data. They don't lack for data in general.
No.
It's transforming that data into useful information.
Yeah.
That's one of the things they lack.
Yeah, absolutely. And that's a great point, right? It's a little bit of an oversimplification to say there's no value in just having data. But in addition to thinking about it as a data value ladder, right? At what point does having it become data that is usable or data that has meaning or transforms it into some kind of insight from which a decision can be
Mhm.
made, right? You also have the question of kind of moving across a data value chain where you're trying to think about the decisions that you need or want to make and whether or not the data that you have can actually address those things and what kinds of ways do you line up your data quality checkpoints with both the use case and how the data is moved through that system so that you can make sure that your use case at the end, you can use that data for the thing that you wanted to use it for. Because
Yes.
often in that process of saying, we have all of this data, like we should make some kind of decisions on it, what kinds of decisions that data can actually or reliably inform often gets compromised as the data
Yes.
as it moves through the organization. And then you have people at the end expecting that you can answer certain kinds of questions with it. And in fact, something has happened in the meantime to lose the context and the connectivity between this is what this data can be used for. Here's a decision we're trying to make with it. And you end up trying to use data that doesn't really fit for certain kinds of decision making
Yep.
purposes to make a decision just because a decision needs to be made.
Yep. And there may have been certain adjustments that you could have made early on in how you collect the data. It could have been a button that you click or something in terms of how things are categorized if you knew that this particular division over here wanted to use it to answer that question.
Exactly.
I think that's great. You were working for the state, but you also started a grocery store. We haven't really talked much about the grocery store.
The grocery store, how do you end up in pavement friction? Well, you try to start a community grocery store. I recommend this path to everybody. The grocery store was a product of me kind of burning out on these ideas of I know what the dynamics of the market are. I am developing a strategy to address that. I'm going to ask everyone to suspend their disbelief about how the market will change and just accept that this is the way that you should move forward. And then good luck to you. It's been 3 months on our consulting agreement. Thank you very much. I, thinking about ways to look at community building, to look at ways of educating and informing and getting people to think about their own activities differently to encourage people to try new things. I decided that I wanted to start a bulk foods grocery store that would also be part cookbook library, part kind of big spice wall, part community education classes or whatever, and really help people focus on the idea of trying something new without as much barrier to entry, right? Like you've gone to the store and you've had a recipe that called for cloves.
Yep.
And you're like, I bought this little can of cloves, right? I used the 1 or 2 cloves, and now I've got the clove sitting in the back of the spice cabinet. What am I going to do with that?
Hmm.
And so the concept was if you make those things accessible to people with a lower barrier to entry, they're able to go find the recipes, they're able to find people to talk to about it, they're able to find it in bulk quantities. So they're not having to go out and buy this big thing. And people will be willing to try something new. And so I started looking around for places where I would like, where could I find another set of curious people willing to try something new? And lo and behold, it was Richmond, Virginia. It was right down the road from where I was. So as I was thinking about an ideal location to build that kind of community, Richmond popped back up on the radar. And I was like, oh, okay, yeah,
Okay.
it's fine. It looks great. Look at this little neighborhood in Churchill. And so, yeah, I ended up moving back to Richmond. Didn't end up going through with the grocery store, just to be very clear. Like I did some site location touring when I got down here. And as it happened, there was a great little corner grocery store cafe that was getting ready to open up. And I was like, you know what? You guys will do the good work in search of helping people try something new and different and a different way to kind of relate to something that they do every day. And that's how I wound up in paper fiction.
And I was going to say that in some ways it circles us back to the approach that you talked about earlier with taking for clients and being thoughtful, wanting to be thoughtful and get them to consider how can you manage your safety differently? What are some things that you can consider? Not that what you're doing is wrong, but what you're doing won't help you manage this aspect of it. So let's bring that in to help you manage that.
Yeah, there's a large part of it is explicitly kind of a change management process, right? And you don't have to go out and develop a formal change management plan, but we all encounter in our daily lives. There are things that we have to confront and we can choose to move with them. We can choose to embrace that. We can choose to do something. We can choose to kind of reject that or say, not today. I derive a lot of joy from helping people see the positive sides of change, helping people realize additional benefits for themselves through change that they might not otherwise have known about or known that they could access or known how to access. Absolutely.
As we think about wrapping this interview up, if there was some advice that you would give to a listener, maybe they're considering change or they're in a situation where they feel it doesn't quite fit, or maybe they're the person that's saying, I like looking at all of the options. What pieces of advice would you have for them?
Yeah, I think you've pulled out a lot more connective tissue between these recent events that seem otherwise unrelated. You asked at the top, how are these things connected? And I think you've drawn out some great ways. I think most people can identify the things that are frustrating or challenging. That's probably the easiest amount of self reflection we do as humans is to be like, that makes me mad. Like, that's annoying. That's frustrating. Taking the time to say, what about that is frustrating to me? What would need to be different for me to feel differently about this or to change that situation? And then saying, you know what, those things aren't going to go away, right? I will need to confront this in some way. So how can I confront this in a way that allows me to overcome those challenges, those frustrations? We shouldn't undersell our ability to make positive change for ourselves and for the people around us. And I know that sometimes that can seem big, dramatic, or scary to make those changes. But my functional advice in that case is if it helps you to have a plan to make a change, make a plan, right? If it helps you to have a vision for what it is at the end, give yourself a vision for what it looks like at the end. But don't be afraid to trust your gut if you need to make a change.
So if someone listens to this and they want to connect with you, reach out to you, what's the best way for them to do that?
One of the nice things about being here in Richmond is there are a lot of folks who are willing to give time to each other, share time, meet up, talk, share experiences. And so I am always glad to give back in that way too. So if someone wants to reach out to me, I have my email address to make available on the podcast. Please feel free to shoot me an email or you can find me on LinkedIn.
I was going to say we can include a link to your email or your LinkedIn, whichever you prefer. If you want LinkedIn, then we'll put a link to your LinkedIn profile and people can use that to get in contact with you.
I'm always happy to connect with people and help them build community. If you want to include a link to my LinkedIn, people can reach out to me there.
So, Ryland, as we close, I get to the part of the interview that I call the mic flip, where you become the interviewer and I become the interviewee. So now you get a chance to ask me one question.
What question?
One question. What would you like? What would you like?
Just one question. Why not all the questions? Look, we've got like a whole nother hour to do this. I think the way you've described your journey to me, you had that vision. You had a very clear idea of this is where I'm going to be, this is what I'm going to do. I think that you have been able to realize a great deal of that vision. And now, in this phase of your career, your post vision, you've checked that off and said, I did that. It worked for me in these ways. It didn't in these ways. Now I'm going to kind of reorient myself. And that's incredible, right? Not too many people can look back on and reflect on the success of their journey. But my question to you is, if there were one subject area that you, in this reflective phase of your career post vision, if you were to pick one area just to absolutely go down the rabbit hole on, what would that be for you? You know, if you were to like say, here I am sitting high above, kind of looking at, observing, putting together, and this kind of big meta picture, but I really am going to go down the rabbit hole on something. What would it be?
There are several different areas come to mind. So I'm going to talk about a few and then zero in on one. I believe in the power of having a vision of where you want to go and that end result you're looking for. Because when things get tough, it helps to have your ultimate destination in mind. And if you need to reconfigure your plans to be able to get there, I think that is crucial to me. Now, in terms of planning, you want to develop a tight plan, but you want to hold it loosely, meaning that as life unfolds, you're holding it loosely so it can adapt. Life is not always going to conform to your plan, but you can use your plan to help you navigate the conditions that life has now presented you. Then there is the power of curiosity, being able to approach any conversation with, I don't know all of the answers, and I'm not going to try to get you to conform to how I think. I'm going to be genuinely curious about where you are, about how you think. I want to get your thoughts on a particular issue because I find that opens up different possibilities that I would have never thought about. I like to approach things with curiosity. When I think about the one thing that I would zero down on, it is the power of your habits to shape your life. Because we are not who we think we are. We are not the vision of who we want to be, but we eventually become the person that our habits create us into being. If there are changes that you want, if you want something different, you have to begin to put systems in place to help you build those recurring habits, those actions, those activities that will produce the difference that you want.
I think absolutely. putting yourself in a position to actually do that thing through the systems, structures around you, what you yourself are doing.
That is true. Okay,
Yeah.
Ryland, I want to thank you so much for joining me for this conversation. I really appreciate it. Hi, this is James, the coach in your corner. Most leaders I work with are reactive about themselves and proactive about everything else. Here's what I mean: their projects have dashboards, their teams have KPIs, their pipelines have leading and lagging indicators, and there's nothing to help manage their combined dashboard for leadership in life until something goes wrong. Then they investigate and run the post mortem. They figure out what they should have caught earlier. But honestly, they go right back to managing work and life the same way that produced the initial problem. On a major project, you institutionalize the wins, what worked well, and you put in gates to guard against what did not work. You set up the new project and monitor against that performance. I don't presume to have all of the answers, just some questions for you to consider this week. What inputs are you monitoring for work and home? What outcomes are you working towards? How often do you review or monitor your progress? You don't have to wait until something crashes before you pay attention. That might be too late. Systematic monitoring of your progress will help you be proactive in leadership and life. You don't need heroics, vision boards, or another book. Just a small recurring system that catches the drift well before a crash. I'm Dr. James Bryant, the coach in your corner, and I want you to be great this week.